Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on neurodiversity on campus, student-centered services, and faculty support. We are honored that Dr. Natalie Holdren accepted the invitation to present today. Before I officially introduce our presenter, please allow me to address a few logistical items. I am Will Francis, Project Director for Post-Secondary Education at the UCLA Tarjan Center. The Tarjan Center at UCLA is a federally designated Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and your host for today's webinar. Support for today's webinar comes from the California Community College's Chancellor's Office through a contract that enables us to provide technical assistance and training to community colleges DSPS who are working to provide equitable supports, services, and opportunities for students with disabilities, including intellectual disability and autism. As part of our accountability for this work, we will be sending you one poll question before this webinar concludes. Please take 1 minute to complete the satisfaction question that we will be asking. In addition, we will be requesting feedback through a survey that will take 2 to 4 minutes to complete. Your participation is much appreciated. Today's webinar will address neurodiversity on campus, student-centered services, and faculty support. Some of our institutions are re-evaluating our diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, frameworks. We have found that often neurodiversity and disability are left out of those conversations. We believe that one way that we can engage in continuous improvement of our DEI-focused work is to be intentional about including neurodiversity and disability in our DEI-related conversations and practices. Today, we will be shining a light on student-centered services, which we believe are conducive to facilitating and improving student outcomes. We are excited to share the content of today's webinar with you. A number of our colleagues are unable to attend today's webinar and have requested a recording of the proceedings. In order to facilitate access to a clean recording of the webinar, we have muted all calls. As we proceed through today's presentation, our presenter would love to respond to questions that arise from or that are related to the content of the presentation. Please, at this time, look at the bottom of the Zoom program display where you will find a chat or text box. We are asking that you insert your questions into the chat box throughout the duration of the webinar. We will address your questions and welcome you to submit as many questions as naturally arise. Our presenter pre-selected areas within the presentation that we believe are natural spaces for questions and answers. However, we are asking you to insert your questions into the chat at any time. We will address as many questions as possible in the Q&A spaces, and we have reserved 5 minutes at the end of the presentation for additional questions as well. This may be a good time to test the chat function. We have a very specific question for this. Please share in the chat feature your affiliation and role. That is, please insert your affiliation and role into the chat box. I see there are approximately about 76 of you, so we'll give you a minute to do this, but please insert your affiliation and role. Thank you for doing that. Please continue to do so if you haven't yet. To all of our webinar participants and attendees, thank you for joining us today. And now I will provide some information about our presenter. Dr. Natalie Holdren is the Education Specialist Credential Coordinator, ESN, at the Jiverts Graduate School of Education at UC Santa Barbara. She also serves as an educational consultant at Santa Barbara City College, where she provides faculty training and student support related to neurodiversity. She is a member of the TASH Board of Directors, a national organization dedicated to promoting inclusion of individuals with disabilities in all aspects of life through policy, advocacy, and research. She also serves as a mentor for Georgetown University's Leadership Academy for cultural and linguistic competence in network supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Dr. Holdren recently completed work on the 8th edition of Families and Professionals, Trusting Partnerships in General and Special Education. It's a textbook published by Pearson. Dr. Holdren also serves as a consultant for various educational institutions on projects related to inclusion, instruction, and post-secondary education. Thank you, Dr. Holdren, for your willingness to share from the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges today. And now, without further ado, here's our presenter, Dr. Natalie Holdren.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And I also thank you for putting your roles and affiliations in the chat box. I see many of my Santa Barbara City College colleagues here today, so please feel free to chime in via chat if I miss something, or to help elaborate on some of the great work that we are doing. I really appreciate all of you so much, and I feel grateful to be a part of your team. So today, as we talk about neurodiversity on campus, student-centered services, and faculty support, I just wanted to start by giving you kind of an overview of where we are going today. First, I'm going to be speaking more generally about neurodiversity and the neurodiversity movement. And then I'll shift gears and talk about the work that we've done at Santa Barbara City College over, as far as I've been involved, over the past 5 years. And I'll start by digging into student-centered services. We'll have an opportunity for discussion, and then I'll go back and talk about faculty training and support, and then back to discussion. So first, I want to start off with some considerations, and the first one is just about language use. I want to briefly mention identity versus person-first language, and I know that many of you are probably familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, some professionals, because of the training that we receive, are uncomfortable or surprised to hear identity first language. So for example, to use the term autistic or neurodivergent as opposed to person first language, which is often taught in graduate programs. And the reality is that often identity first language is preferred by self-advocates and disability rights activists. But the bottom line is that folks can be asked how they identify, and we just want to be mindful of people's how people identify for themselves. But you will be hearing me use identity first language, and I just wanted to preface the conversation with that. The second thing that I want to highlight is that there's a great resource called Avoiding Ableist Language, Suggestions for Autism Researchers, and it was published in the journal Autism in Adulthood, which tends to represent autistic voice in the research. And this is hot off the press 2021 and is a valuable resource, not just for researchers, but also for practitioners who want to dig a little deeper into how language impacts the work that we do and the services that we provide for students. The second consideration that I wanted to talk about is the notion of nothing about us without us. And I wanted to start by saying, though part of my identity is as a professional and as an academic, central to my work is this principle, which is also the slogan for the disability rights community. And I just want to acknowledge that I am reliant on the wisdom and work of the disability rights and disability justice communities. And what that means is that when I am gathering resources or developing programming for students or for faculty, I draw heavily on the expertise of those with lived experience and credit their contributions to the things that I share. So what that means is when at City College I'm looking for resources or I'm creating programming, I am leaning on the work of neurodivergent scholars, researchers, and activists I am looking at resources provided by autistic-led organizations. I am using my own Santa Barbara City Neurodiversity Club's expertise and input. They often have served as kind of an advisory committee for my work, and just open to ongoing student input for those that I've worked with. So the other thing that I want to say, and then I will stop prefacing and start presenting, is that I am a work in process, and I am always learning and seeking out new knowledge. I've been to a lot of trainings where the underlying assumption is that a neurotypical presenter is presenting to a neurotypical audience, and that is never my assumption. In fact, I hope neurodivergent community is represented here today, and I welcome your voice and expertise. So we are going to do a quick poll before we get going on how familiar you are with the concept of neurodiversity. And we're asking for you to do a 1 through 5 scale. So this is a new concept to me. This is a somewhat new concept to me, all the way to I am very familiar with this concept, or I live this work. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that.
We have an 85% completion rate so far.
Wonderful. I'll follow your lead on when you think we should wrap it up.
%87. Let's see if we can get 1 or 2 more to do this. I see others are still contributing. All right, as soon as we hit 90% participation rate, I'll stop and show the results. We need 1 or 2 more of you if you could. Here we go. So I'll end the poll, and then I'll share the results.
Great. Wonderful. So we see that 21% are very familiar, which is fantastic. And then there's a little variation beyond there. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I am just going to jump in, and I'm also going to apologize if you're participating in this and don't find that that any of this is new information for you, but I hope that you will help us all by contributing your own experience and expertise as we move into discussions and throughout the presentation with our chat box. So I'm grateful for all of you for being here. So first off, I'm just going to be defining some terms. And the first one is, of course, neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is just the idea that there are many different types of brains. So it refers to the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning across our species. And this emblem that you see above is often a sign for neurodiversity. And this here is something that I like to share. It's actually a poster created by Erin Heumann, and Erin is an autistic artist and also the director of the Autistic Women and Nonbinary Network. And I feel like this is a good visual representation of neurodiversity. So just as there is diversity in the animal world and diversity across people and our attributes and physical characteristics, there is diversity of human brains. And diversity, the top is the point. Diversity is beautiful. Diversity across neurotypes is beautiful, which is central to the neurodiversity movement. So the neurodiversity movement sees this variation in brains, neurodiversity, as a valuable form of diversity that benefits our society. And the movement started within autistic community, but has expanded to include people with other disabilities, labels, or identities, such as dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and other neurological variations. For the following 2 slides, I'm going to be highlighting the work of autistic scholar and academic Nick Walker to talk about some neurodiversity vocabulary and the neurodiversity paradigm. So neurodivergent, sometimes abbreviated as ND, means having a brain that functions in ways that diverge significantly from the dominant societal standards of normal. And then neurotypical, often abbreviated as NT, means having a style of neurocognitive functioning that falls within the dominant societal standards of normal. Walker also talks about the neurodiversity paradigm. This is a specific perspective on neurodiversity based on the principles that, and I apologize, but I'm just going to read these to you. 1, neurodiversity is a natural and valuable form of human diversity. 2, the idea that there is one normal type of brain or one right style of neurocognitive functioning is no more valid or conducive to a healthy society than the idea that there is one normal or right ethnicity, gender, or culture. And 3, the social dynamics that manifest in regard to neurodiversity are similar to those that manifest in regards to other forms of diversity. So ethnicity, gender, or culture as examples. And these dynamics include social power inequalities. So the idea that society places value on neurotypical brains and sees deficit divergent ones, and that these dynamics lead to power differentials, discrimination, and to stigma. The neurodiversity movement is rooted in the social model of disability, and most professional programs tend to educate folks in the medical model of disability. And so again, I apologize for those of you that this is old information, but it's pretty important to our cause for today. And in the medical model of disability, disability is seen as a deficit or an issue that is inherent to an individual. And then the goal is to address that inherent deficit through intervention, so fixing the deficit. Under a social model of disability, and I know this, I'm also oversimplifying, but disability is a natural form of diversity, and the goal is to accommodate disability with optimal outcomes for based on what an individual wants for themselves and their goals that are relevant to who they are and their multiple identities. And so this is the part that I enjoy. Why? Why does a neurodiversity approach matter on a college campus? And so these are some of the reasons that just pop up for me. The first one is stigma versus disability identity. So is a student's disability a source of shame, or is their disability a part of who they are as a person? And do they celebrate that part of themselves as a person? 2 is isolation versus disability community. So does it cause them to feel isolated and alone? Is the disability othering for them? Or does it provide access to and support from a community of individuals who have similar lived experiences? Fixing deficits versus identifying and gathering relevant supports. A neurodiversity approach also impacts the way that supports are delivered. Are professionals fixing students' deficits, or are they centering students' goals for leading self-directed lives? And it leads to a shift from the professional as expert to professional as facilitator. It's also critical, as we talked about in the opening of this session, to justice work. So justice work that ignores neurodiversity is incomplete. And lastly, intersectionality matters. So students from non-dominant cultures and marginalized identities who are also neurodivergent often have different experiences, different access opportunities, and different support needs. And we need to be thoughtful and intentional about that as well. So some implications for embracing a neurodiversity approach on a college campus are, one, just recognizing and celebrating the contribution all individuals make to the diversity of a campus, and being public about that, celebrating that. It also has the potential to help faculty think about their teaching in a way that improves access for students, and likely for all students. I like to say good teaching is good teaching. And I just think that that's an important aspect of having a neurodiversity approach on campus. A neurodiversity approach sees neurodivergent students as the expert on their own support needs and creates collaborative partnerships with students as opposed to a professional knows best dynamic. And then this is a big one, and I know many of you who are working in disability services can relate to this, but it helps take the stigma out of seeking supports and accommodations through disability services. It can also help bring the ableism that's often inherent in a medical model orientation to the surface so that honest conversations and meaningful support can occur. And it can help draw students to supports who may not normally seek them. In having a conversation with one of my students, asked, well, have you ever thought about attending the anxiety support group? It seems like a really great space, and I love the person who leads it. And she said, well, I've always assumed that group would be designed for neurotypicals. So just being thoughtful about access and being thoughtful about spaces in a way that allows students to more freely access the things that we offer on campus. So this slide, I know many of you have seen versions of it. It's not new for most of you, but the other reason why it's important is because of the policy differences that exist between high school and college disability supports. So under the IDEA, the student's disability is identified by the school, the student's supported by their parents and teachers, and the school carries the primary responsibility for offering and arranging student accommodations based on student needs. But of course, when they come to college, the student must self-identify to the Office of Disability Services. If they do not have documentation, they must get assessed, usually at their own expense, and then they must self-advocate to arrange for and receive accommodations. And students report that some of this is hard. So first, I want to give a nod to the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. This is a white paper that they published in 2020 called Benchmarks to Inclusion, Creating Core Principles to Facilitate Autistic Student Success in Higher Education. I keep it on my desk. If you are interested, they have it, it's a PDF. There's no paywall. You can just go and download it from their website. Encourage you to take a look at it. But in the paper, it talks about barriers that students who identify as autistic navigate. And one of them is acclimating to the college campus. They find that to be a major challenge. They report that there's little guidance for students on the ways college differs from high school. Neurodivergent students often struggle more than their peers with these adjustments. They often feel unsure how to make friends and connect with professors for course assistance, and have difficulty navigating academic culture. Although this was a study that was published based on a relatively small, by research standards, focus group, these comments align very closely with my own conversations with students that I've served over the past 5 years. And then just to add to that, during times of COVID, my Santa Barbara City College students have reported that the pandemic has really increased their experience of isolation and a feeling of disconnectedness from campus, both socially and academically. That navigating campus resources and classes during remote instruction added extra challenges related to organization, time management, accountability, and accessing support. We have found, and this one surprised me a little bit, I'll be honest, that students want us to be more assertive with our outreach. They want higher touch outreach from us. And then lastly, students experienced heightened levels of anxiety during remote schooling. Not all of them, some of them actually preferred it, but some of them experienced heightened anxiety, both to do with online instruction, but also just the experience with dealing with a pandemic in general, which we of course all have had experience with at this point. And so maybe I will pause briefly here because I have not been doing a good job of checking the chat box and see if anyone has had, if there are any questions now. Is that okay, Will?
Yes, it's okay. I have not seen any questions yet either.
Okay.
One of the things that I'm wondering is how many of you have noticed that neurodiversity and disability has not been a part of the DEI conversation on your campus? And what approaches have you used so that neurodiversity and disability can become a part of that conversation? And feel free to insert your comments into the chat.
That's great.
And I don't want this question to overshadow your questions, so please feel free to insert your questions into the chat.
Should I give it a minute, or do you want me to keep going and we can stop again? I'm flexible about that.
So there's a comment here, and that comment is, and thank you so much, Dr. Holdren, for being so flexible. This comment says, it's almost always left out, though some of us try to bring it forward whenever possible. So yeah, what are some strategies, or how have some of you used, I'm assuming, innovative ways to get that conversation going, or to have neurodiversity included in these conversations and disability? Ooh, someone else said neurodiversity is not a part of the DEI initiatives. Yeah, so how are you addressing this? What ideas, what is working for you? What are you learning about trying to get the conversation going around this? And then I have a question. How can you best outreach to students who may benefit from DSPS services, but do not identify as having a disability?
I appreciate that. I think, honestly, I think the next, as we move forward, the slides will address that, and I'll try to keep that question at the center of my presentation, because that is one of the huge benefits of a neurodiversity approach on campus, is being able to support students who need support, but who have not considered or are not interested in accessing disability services or are not eligible.
We have two comments. One's from Steve. Steve says, our campus includes autism and neurodiversity in our annual Diversity in Culture Fest, but it does not go much further yet. And then Teresa says, in my limited experience regarding serving students, physical diversity is commonly discussed, but I have not heard neurodiversity discussed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm pleased that that we can have this conversation today, and unfortunately, I'm not surprised. That's also been my experience.
I like Lauren Clark's comment. I know her. I wish I could have her voice to voice this herself. But she said, for good reasons, the DEI emphasis on BIPOC experiences is front and center right now, because disability crosses race and ethnicity and other social group identities in intersectional ways. Our campus can do better to include disability as part of addressing multiple forms of discrimination and marginalization.
Yep, I absolutely agree. Really, intersectionality is critical, and recognizing kind of the overlay of multiple marginalizations, not to decenter BIPOC experience at all, but just to enrich the conversation so that more identities are a part of the conversation.
And I'll read just one more, and this is that because it's not visible, neurodiversity, I think it is easy to forget about. Yeah.
Thank you. I encourage you to keep using the chat box as we go forward, and I will be revisiting so that I can keep tabs on your thinking. I'm not an excellent multitasker with the chat box, so.
Yeah, I have two more if you'd like me to do those.
Great.
So Rebecca says, I would only add that disability and neurodiversity are not necessarily synonymous.
Right.
Good point. I saw another one. There are workshops, this comes from Amber. There are workshops teaching ADA compliance, but they seem to be limited in what disabilities, neurodivergent groups are served here. And then Karen says, I've always wondered whose responsibility it is to let students and their parents know about the significant differences between the support at the high school and college level, especially regarding course modification, which happens extensively at the high school level. I have had to explain differences to families, and it's a difficult discussion. I think you'll cover some of that in your slides, or maybe you did already.
Well, and I will just say that I absolutely think that, you know, as somebody who trains teacher educators, or as a teacher educator who trains K-12 teachers, I do think that we need to do a better job of making sure that K-12 educators are able to share these with parents and help them prepare themselves and their students. I think there's been some promising work happening, for instance, student-led IEPs, and really including student voice in the IEP process as students get older, but I definitely think that there's a lot more that we could be doing. And hopefully I will cover more of that as we move forward.
Great, thank you. You can take it away, I think.
All right. So I am an neurodiversity / educational consultant for Santa Barbara City College. And I just want to be clear that I am not an employee of Santa Barbara City College, and that my work is funded by grants and private donations. And I know that whenever I attend a presentation and somebody says that, I roll my eyes and think, well, that must be nice. But I don't think that that means that some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today are not easy to bring to other campuses. So I hope that that is not discouraging to folks. My role is to design and implement supports for students on the spectrum and those with related needs, and to provide training for faculty and staff. And over the course of the last 5 years, our supports and approaches have really evolved, sometimes in response to our students, and sometimes in response to global pandemics and a whole host of other things. So I'll be talking a little bit about that as I move forward. But one of the questions in the chat box, I believe from Dr. Hayward, was around how do we help support students who don't identify as having disabilities. And one of the, I think, greatest things about my role at Santa Barbara City College is that because I am funded privately, I'm able to serve as a source of outreach. I can work with students who are referred to me who are not currently connected to DSPS, and through our conversations and work together can help them consider if they would benefit from becoming DSP students. I work for 2 institutions and we have different acronyms, and then help them determine if they are eligible or how to become eligible, and then support them in navigating that process. So that has been one of the powerful relationships that we've been able to forge with DSPS at City College and students who are not receiving supports. So I'm going to start, instead of just talking about exactly what we're doing, I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the features of student-centered neurodiversity supports that I've been trying to, or that we have, as a team, have been trying to think about. And the first one is high-touch referrals. And actually the first two go together. So also collaboration, partnership, and professional development across programs and departments. So we work really well as a team. And for instance, and this is kind of pre-COVID when everybody was on campus, but for instance, if somebody was working with a student and started, you know, to seem like they might be a good candidate for working with me, I just get a text message and we potentially would have a meetup right then and there so that the student can have a face and a conversation and feel comfortable to follow up with me at a later time that works for us. And so just thoughtful, high-touch referrals based on our kind of collaborative relationships across departments at City College. Another one is just mutual respect and trusting relationships with faculty, but primarily with students, creating an environment where a student who, you know, wants to talk to me about ableism on campus feels comfortable enough to bring it up and have a conversation, or someone who wants to talk to me about the specific kinds of supports that they need that they maybe haven't talked to other people about. And then definitely authentic ongoing opportunities for students to guide the evolution of our support of them. Three more features. One is just elevating a neurodiversity perspective on campus. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've done that through our Neurodiversity Club and through some of the programming and also through faculty trainings. A big one for me is engaging with and learning from autistic and neurodivergent communities. And then the last one is really redefining participation. So we had a student who founded our Santa Barbara City College Neurodiversity Club, which I'll be getting into detail about. But one of the things that I really learned from her is that we need to be thoughtful about what we consider participation. So if we need to be clear that we are going to create neurodivergent spaces, that students should be able to come and participate however they're comfortable participating. And over Zoom, that could be with their cameras off and maybe not even speaking, you know, just observing or participating only through chat, or sitting, you know, in a room, just sitting on a couch and listening to music while we meet, which had also happened during the club. So anyway, just this idea of not having this neurotypical definition of what participation looks like and really being thoughtful and flexible about what it means to participate in the programming that we are providing. So whenever I attend a training or a webinar, I am always mostly interested in resources. And so I wanted to be able to put some of these things that we've used front and center. Apologies if you're familiar with these already, but if you aren't, I encourage you to take a look. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is an organization led by autistics for autistics, and they have a really handy resource library available on their website. This is just an example of 4 of the books that they have available there. Almost all of them are able to be downloaded into PDF form, and then you could use them via screen reader. Some of them also are available to purchase in print. This first one, Navigating College, a handbook on self-advocacy, we actually ordered a bunch of them and had them on campus so that students who were referred to my services, when they showed up to talk to me, we would just kind of say, we also have this book that's available, and like, here's this community online, and look at these other resources. And to just kind of help students take a look at neurodiversity related resources if they had not been made familiar, or if they were not familiar with them already. I work with a lot of students who are diagnosed with autism at a later age. And so this Knowing Why book has been a helpful resource, and welcome to the autistic community. And then the one called Roadmap to Transition, we actually use as a textbook for one of our California Adult Education Program classes on self-advocacy. And the website is down below. This is another organization that I referenced earlier, the Autistic Women and Nonbinary Network, and there is the link to their resource library. And they have some really helpful and really timely resources available on their website that also you can just download as a PDF. So we've got surviving holidays during COVID pandemic times. We have tips and advice for autistic trans people about finding and going to doctors. We have a PDF about what is autistic burnout. And these resources have been really valuable in just creating community and also pointing students to community. And a lot of these are resources that they have pointed us to. So this has been very valuable. And then just a couple of more, and these are actually posts from our Santa Barbara City College Neurodiversity Club Facebook page. So these were put up by students. This is Noor on the right from the Autistic SelfAdvocacy Network, who's actually our keynote at Hightouch conference this year. But this is useful AT for autistic people, and a link to all sorts of resources. And then the other one, 15 autistic activists you should follow this Autism Acceptance Month, and just helping students access community via the interwebs. The top logo is STEMtastic, and I just wanted to give a nod to them. That is an autistic-owned online store that sells fidgets, and our Neurodiversity Club, we were customers of theirs. In fact, I have my STEMtastic, my favorite STEMtastic fidget with me today. Okay, this is another just an example of a resource. This is from the University of Leeds, and it is an infographic about the positives of autism. And I like to highlight resources like this when I'm doing faculty trainings or when I'm working with some of my groups. I've had students really have emotional responses to a slide like this because nobody had ever talked to them about the fact that there are positives around identifying as autistic, or that there are, you know, that this was a view of themselves that they could have. And so I do think that being mindful of the resources that we're sharing, both with faculty and staff, can be really powerful. Oh, good. And then I see in the chat box that people are also sharing resources, and I encourage you to do that. Okay, I'm going to keep charging forward. And I will come back and revisit the chat box. I told you I'm not a great multitasker. So I'm going to do an overview of some of the neurodiversity programming and supports that we've offered for students over time. And I will be honest that not all of them, they haven't all existed at the same time. This is kind of an evolution of things that have come and gone, or that we've adapted and adjusted based on what was going on campus, or based on whether we could be in person or not, and all of those other factors. The first and probably most central piece of my work is individual meetings. So this is an opportunity where students, regardless of whether they are DSP students or not, can discuss their experiences with me and their support needs. I tend to, as I said, share resources on neurodiversity and disability identity, and help them find spaces where disability community lives. And then mostly my work is providing individualized support. And sometimes that's related to kind of goal setting, action planning, and accountability. And this is really not like me doing this for them. This is them telling me what they are hoping for out of their meetings with me. Us talking through next steps that they might be able to take. And then a lot of them appreciate seeing me on a regular basis so that I can check in with them and see how they're doing on their progress. It's very self-directed, and the role that I play differs based on the student that I'm working with. The topics usually are around either academic support, interacting with faculty, social support, a lot of support around dealing with roommates or peers, connecting to resources and campus services, some things that relate to executive functioning, and then employment support. And we do partner with the Department of Rehabilitation, and we have a vocational training program that was funded by the California Adult Education Program as well. And the bottom line is I'm developing relationships with students. And because I'm developing relationships with students, I am able to help them navigate certain services or encourage them to come into some of the group supports that we offer. I've had many students who first choose to meet with me for a few months and then enter into one of the programs or clubs that we offer. And that tends to be kind of a nice high touch way to support students as they transition to our other types of programming. So one of those other types is the Neurodiversity Club. And the Neurodiversity Club was created by students for students. And I kind of served as the unofficial advisor, and Linda Beers, who is with us today, is the official advisor. And some of the things that were kind of important about the Neurodiversity Club, one, and this is about, what counts as participation, we used communication badges. So you could walk into this space and grab either a red, yellow, or green badge to communicate to others how you were feeling about how much communicating you wanted to be doing. And that was perfectly fine. Whatever badge you chose, everyone in the room would respect it. And that way people who maybe weren't comfortable talking to a lot of people that they didn't know could still comfortably hear what was going on in our club and think about how they wanted to participate. And the other great thing about the communication badges is they're fluid during a meeting. So, and many of you are probably already familiar with communication badges, but if you're not, you might walk into a room wearing a red, and then after listening for a little bit, feel like you're ready to be yellow, or you might come in green and then decide that you want to turn red. So it's a fluid process. We worked hard to create a sensory friendly and fidget friendly space. And the purpose was to build social networks on campus and community, and students would talk about their support needs with each other and provide support for each other. I was largely just there to provide support as needed or as wanted. And then the other goal that they had was really to spread awareness, acceptance, and visibility on campus. And I think the next slide gets to that a little bit. But we also, I want to say, have a partnership with The Well. The Well is this amazing space at Santa Barbara City College. It's a wellness center, and they offer a lot of kind of support groups and counseling and food and condoms and kindness. It's just a space where students can go and get what they need. And our partnership with The Well was another way, I think, of elevating kind of a neurodiversity perspective on campus, that if you went to The Well, you could go to a mindfulness support group, or you could go to a neurodiversity club. It just created that as kind of a neutral space where we were trying to meet the needs of a lot of people across many identities. Not that mindfulness is an identity. So a little more about the Neurodiversity Club. One of the things I really leaned on the Neurodiversity Club for was to help provide input on what my role was at City College, and also to help provide input on the faculty support that I was providing. I had them vet my handouts and my trainings, and that was a really awesome experience. I mean, the fact that we all trusted each other enough to do that, I think, is really important. We would host events, so we would do some lunch gatherings. We would attend the campus club day and set up a table. And then my very favorite thing was when we participated in the finals carnival. So they have a space where all the club organizations, if they want to, can set up a table. And it's supposed to be fun and provide kind of wellness and support for students on campus. And the Neurodiversity Club, we decided to have a fidget fest. So we did some grant writing, and we got some money, and we used that money to buy all sorts of fidgets, and then we handed them out to campus on finals week. People could come and stand at the table and check them all out and decide which ones they liked best. I will note that this is not COVID friendly. And I don't see a Fidget Fest anywhere in our near future, but it was really fun. And then, you know, we tried to connect with and educate our Santa Barbara City College community. We were written about in the channels multiple times. And then we also worked to connect with the larger neurodiversity movement. A lot of my work at TASH helps connect me to autistic academics and scholars, and we were able to connect with some folks and kind of talk about ways that we could share resources with each other and bring neurodiversity to campus. Another offering that we had is Shoreliners, and Shoreliners was sponsored by DSPS, and it was a monthly lunch social group rooted in a neurodiversity perspective. And the idea was that this was a safe space for kind of social connection and social support. It was student-centered, so you know, it wasn't like me telling kids like, we're going to work on social skills today. It was more about students talking about what they wanted and needed, and me working to bring some of those things to campus. So for example, we would invite, you know, our disability counselors would come and have lunch with us, and that would kind of help the students feel more comfortable with them, and then they could ask them questions in a really informal way without having to make an appointment and show up at the appointment. And so it was just kind of a nice way to bring student services to them. And of course we offered food, so that's always a draw. And a lot of those students ended up becoming friends and building relationships with each other and feeling more comfortable with faculty, I think, as a result. And then this last one that I'm going to talk about is the coaching program. And this is the one that we've done most recently. Unfortunately, the Neurodiversity Club has not been active. And one of the big challenges with the Neurodiversity Club is that I should say, it hasn't been active in the same iteration that it was when we started. When it started, it was created by a student for students. And you really need a student or a student group to lead the charge on that one. And when our founder graduated, which is wonderful, she worked hard to find somebody to take her place, and she couldn't. So what we did was we kind of merged it from club status to support space with the WELL. And so that has changed in some ways. But the latest iteration is that we have created what's called a coaching program. And the idea is to identify and recruit a cohort of students. And we'd have weekly group meetings on student-driven topics related to neurodiversity for the whole semester. We shared resources via a resource hub, which is basically a Google Doc with a bunch of links on it. And then students who were part of the coaching program could opt to have individual weekly coaching meetings to connect about things that they wanted to talk about one-on-one. And I will note that every single person in the group opted to have those weekly meetings. And then, let's see, $100 incentive for completing the full semester of the program, which was a good deal. Let's see, I'm just checking the box really quick. Oh yeah, I'm appreciating these. Let's see, I'm getting questions about pausing for questions. I have just a couple more slides about the coaching program, and I think it would be a good time to stop and talk about your questions and comments in the chat box. It seems like it's getting active in there. So the program ran remotely due to COVID. We had fewer students than we had intended, and the program definitely evolved based on student interest. So what we initially had thought the club would look like, or the group would look like, tended to evolve so that students also wanted to socialize with each other on the weekends, but they didn't want to do it on their own. They wanted support. And we created a messenger thread so that students could spontaneously reach out to each other, which they did, which was pretty valuable. And then this is kind of an overview of what a coaching program session looked like. So we'd start with check-ins. One thing, this is, you know, it evolved and changed from group to group, but this is just an example. So we'd start with one thing you're grateful for and one thing you're struggling with. And participation in check-ins was optional, or you could do it via the chat box. Students almost always participated. I had one student who started attending the coaching program with this camera off, but then ended up turning it on and really getting a lot out of the program. And then we would introduce a resource or topic of the week that most of the time was based on something that they thought was important. We'd often share video clips or use sample documents that were resources tied to autistic community or related to autistic community. And then we would have group discussion relating to that topic. And I would provide some guiding questions as a scaffold for folks who weren't comfortable just coming up with something spontaneously, but they were always optional. And then we would have an informal chat sharing ideas for future meetings. So here are some of the coaching program topics. And I'll just leave them up there for a second for you to take a look at. And then I will maybe check in with Will about what we want to do about chat. Maybe this is the time to do chat box. So one of the questions I see is, I would like to hear your advice on talking with students about accountability and meeting course objectives at the university level. So I don't know that I have anything groundbreaking to say about that in particular, but I think one of the things that was interesting for me to see is that students wanted somebody to hold them. A lot of the students that I work with wanted somebody to hold them accountable, but it was like a very, they wanted freedom in that accountability in terms of how it played out. So for instance, I saw my role, instead of kind of checking on what they were doing, to be more about checking on their plan for setting themselves up for success. So for example, having them talk to me about some upcoming deadline and then talking them through how they might backwards map and break that one deadline up into smaller steps and put it on their calendar. And then our weekly meetings would serve as opportunities. So they would set a goal for themselves. Like this week, I'm going to draft the first 2 paragraphs, and I have a meeting with the writing center. And so then I would put on my calendar for the following session that I was to check in about their first 2 paragraphs in their meeting with the writing center. So really helping them think about what their big picture due dates and assignments were, and then working with them to decide what was going to be most effective in terms of laying out smaller goals from those larger goals.
And this is Catherine, I can read a few of the questions and some of the resources out that people shared. So going back a little bit from where we left off after our last pause, there was a comment about from Genevieve that I think transition teachers in high school need to speak to the Americans with Disabilities Act and IDEA protections. So maybe a point about that importance of the relationships with transition teachers. Another question was about, sorry, there's a lot in here now. Was about how do you go about, sorry, how does one, this is from Esmeralda, how does one go about getting diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum if they have never been diagnosed before, and particularly women? There's a question about that.
That's a great question. And I'm going to be honest, my response might be a little controversial. So I'm just going to put that out there first. In my experience in working with autistic women and autistic adults in general, I find that it's very hard for them to get diagnoses as adults. And also I've talked to colleagues about this, so maybe it's not, you know, colleagues who diagnose adults, maybe it's not so controversial, but I have had pushback on this, or I've seen it in kind of online and in academic spaces. But I tend to think that if students feel like they are on the spectrum, that the important thing is that they find community and find resources and find the supports that are going to help them navigate that experience. I don't necessarily think that you have to have an official diagnosis to benefit from neurodiversity or neurodivergent community. Also, you know, a lot of students who are on the autism spectrum and who have made it to adulthood without getting assessed oftentimes have become so adept at accommodating their own needs that it's hard for them to even be diagnosed. And then the other piece too is that there just aren't an abundance of services, you know, kind of professional services available for adults on the spectrum that would warrant them needing that specific diagnosis. And again, maybe that is a controversial thing to say, but that has just been my experience in working with both diagnosed and undiagnosed adults on the autism spectrum. I think certainly it's important to have the diagnoses and the documentation that you need to be eligible for the accommodations that you need. But sometimes people are coming to me saying, I think I'm autistic, but I need the piece of paper. And I think if that's your experience, I totally value and appreciate that. But I also think that some people just identify as neurodivergent and benefit from participating in community. And I think that's wonderful too.
I'm going to share, or at least draw attention to, a couple of resources that participants have added to the chat. So Rebecca tells us about an organization that's actually out of Canada, but says it's one of the best resources that they've found, and it's Embrace Autism. And if you look for Rebecca's comment, the link is right there. Dr. Godding, Adam also shared a link for a document that I believe is titled A Conversation with Parents and for Professionals as well. So there's another link that people can grab right now. Someone commented about liking the communication badges, and I agree, I've seen them before. I think they're a great idea to let people know where you're at in terms of how social you want to be. Teresa asked, you mentioned the positives of autism. I heard that Elon Musk has Asperger's syndrome. What are some of the benefits? Not that you have to be famous or rich to be valued. So maybe you can speak to what you've heard, you know, autistic individuals referred to as positives, or what your experience has been.
Yeah, so I know that I only had that infographic on screen for a brief snippet, but the link is available, so please feel free to check that out. There's also some really funny things that are posted online by autistic folks that are jokes about neurotypicals that I think are really funny, but highlight strengths of folks with autism. A lot of the jokes are about how neurotypicals tend to make small talk and say things that they don't mean. So perhaps, you know, being more direct is sometimes considered a strength of neurodivergence. But also attention to detail and being able to really immerse themselves in complicated tasks and innovation and you know, I don't know. I would love to pull that slide back up, but there are many things, and I will also just add that it was interesting to see how some of the autistic communities online responded to Elon Musk announcing that he was on the spectrum. And that's a conversation for another time, but I encourage you to go on social media and read about it, because there were some funny things stated. You know, some folks from autistic communities saying like, that's really great, and other folks saying like, we don't need you. So that was an interesting dialogue that I dug into when that happened.
And we have related to going back to the badges, someone was asking if there is a link to be able to access those badges.
So I believe that the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network has something on their website about communication badges, but I will also say that our Neurodiversity Club, you know how in office supply stores, they sell those little stickers and they come in red, yellow, green. And I don't actually know what they're for, but we would just buy those and put the stickers on the table. And that was, you know, we didn't make like the fancy badges. The founder of the club actually had a necklace that she wore all the time. That was a communication badge necklace, and she could just flip to the color that she wanted. And that was very cool. Oh, and I see somebody's put the link up. Thank you.
And then there are a couple of questions and also some comments, and maybe you'll also expand about, Shauna's asking about resources regarding relationships and dating. It's a hot topic with our students. And Adam responded that they have a relationship and human sexuality curriculum, and I believe that's North Orange. Will, you can confirm. Adam is also recommending Get Safe has a curriculum and training for relationships and human sexuality. We've also, Rebecca is reminding for people who have access to Netflix, there's a series called Love on the Spectrum that might be of interest to people. And maybe I just want to pause to make sure if there's any resources or if that's something you're going to be addressing around sexuality and dating.
So I think it's great that other people are offering resources, because it wasn't something I was going to do a deep dive on. The only thing that I will add is that there are researchers and autistic activists who have really highlighted the fact that there are a lot of neurodivergent individuals that are also part of LGBTQ community, and many of the students that I've worked with you know, have identified as non-binary or trans. And I just think that that's an important thing to highlight, is that being cognizant of those communities is, I think, a really important part of neurodiversity work and finding relevant resources.
And we have a couple other comments and questions, but we can come back to that if I want to give you some space to also continue.
Okay. I love an active chat box, so thank you, everybody. This is just, these are some of the feedback from students on what the coaching program did for them. And I won't go into all of these because you can access them on your own, but there were some pretty powerful things that ended up happening for the students that participated. One of them just said, the program has helped me bond with new people, making new friends in the process, and improving my communication skills to converse with others. I've gained more confidence in my social ability to be out in public without the fear of being rejected or socially awkward, which is a big step forward. I'm able to be open with others without feeling uncomfortable, which has helped me to become more understanding and expressive to the point I can sort out my problems without holding them back. I was a shy guy in the beginning, insecure about myself. In the beginning, I had my camera turned off because I was afraid about what others thought about me. Gradually, I began to open up to others in the group and turned on my camera to reveal myself and made many leaps towards a strong end. They also said, I plan to keep in touch with others from the coaching group as they are very relatable and cool people. I wish I had met them sooner as they helped me overcome my depression. Another one, I won't read these to you, but just a lot about feeling heard, holding space, feeling less lonely, feeling like you could talk about yourself without being too much or saying something stupid. And then the student said, I feel like it's kind of helped me to embrace the idea that I'm on the spectrum and learn about things that help me cope with that. It's also really helped me not feel ashamed, which is big, and has connected me with others experiencing similar things. That helps me not feel alone with that kind of struggle. I think the conversation on stimming was helpful because then I got rubber bands. I've been using them day to day, and it helps me stay engaged when I usually might be feeling a little awkward. And then it also just, as a result of feeling more comfortable, I've been more lenient with myself, and that's been helpful, I think, too. And just as an overview, 3 of the students who were in our coaching program went on and graduated. One of them transferred to a UC and will be working on STEM. One of them transferred to an out-of-state college. Another one is working as an in-home service provider for children with autism and discloses his disability to both his employer and to the families that he works with, which you can imagine is a really cool, powerful thing for the families that he's serving. But also I want to talk about some of the challenges. And then we are running out of time, so I will be quick. So I'm not going to lie, this is hard. Finding students who are willing to commit to the program was tough. Our group was smaller than we had anticipated, and COVID also threw a wrench into that. There's also group dynamics. You have to kind of generate a group that you think is going to connect well with each other, and that took a little finesse. And the other piece was students were really struggling with their mental health. And so helping them connect with resources and making sure that they were okay, that felt heavy and hard. And it was central to this work. We did have some challenging group dynamics. There was a couple who were dating and then they broke up and then one of them left. And then just my biggest thing was really wanting to work to encourage them to continue their relationships with each other once they graduated and moved on, so that that support wouldn't go away. So I'm calling this the chat box intermission, but really I think it's time for me to stop talking. And I will say that there are just a few other slides that are mostly discussion about some of the faculty supports that I've provided, but I think you can get an idea by looking at them. There's some sample slides and materials, and I think I'll stop there. Is that okay, Will?
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask Dr. Hayward if she would put the link to the evaluation in the chat feature. I think that there are some very important points that are being made in the chat again. Monique Craig made a comment about a person who suspects they may have autism or ASD or any other disability such as an intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, or epilepsy, may seek an intake appointment via any regional center near their residence in the state of California. And there are 21 regional centers in the state, and there's a link here for the regional centers. I see people are thanking us again for the resources. I think I wanted to see if I could, there's supposed to be another poll. It's a snap and it's on satisfaction. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that because it's still asking me about the previous poll. I don't know why. But Dr. Hayward, if you could please insert the link to the SurveyMonkey evaluation, that would be great. So we would love to take any additional questions that you have at this point. Goodness, the time has flown. We have 2 more minutes left. I want to begin thanking you, Dr. Holdren. Thank you so much for sharing the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges. And I'm keeping my eyes peeled to the chat feature, because if you have any additional questions, we'd love to address them.
I also just want to take a quick minute to thank the newly minted Dr. Will Francis for all of the help and support that he's provided me to prepare for this presentation while simultaneously defending his dissertation. So congratulations.
Thank you, you're so kind. Again, please, it's very important to us to get your feedback on the webinars. So if you could click on the link in the chat feature and complete the evaluation for us, we'd very much appreciate that. Again, I know that you are all busy and we are grateful that you took time out today to join us for this webinar. We're still looking for questions. We have 1 minute left, so we're still looking to see if you have questions. Dr. Holdren, again, thank you so much for your work, both with the students and for sharing from the wealth of your knowledge with us. Dr. Hayward, thank you for your assistance in everything logistic today. Very much appreciated. Thank you for the congratulatory comments. I will stick around for a bit to see if there are additional questions. It's 3:15. I don't want to hold people who have other obligations, but again, I want to thank Dr. Holdren and thank all of you for joining us today. Don't miss out on the action. That signal that I just got, that was someone who completed the evaluation already. Thank you for attending. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Assuming there are no additional questions, I'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll log off. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and very special wishes for the holiday that's coming up. I'm sure we can all enjoy it with family and friends and loved ones. So the best to everyone. Please be safe.